So, this is the Battle of Tsushima. What war was this in? What war? The Battle of Tsushima would be a disastrous defeat in one of the two countries in this war. What's the name of this war? Yeah, the Russo-Japanese War. It was over what part of what is today? What part of, well, today it's part of China. Did someone said it? Yeah, Manchuria. It was over Manchuria. But this is a colonial war. And no one expected this outcome. What U.S. captain, Commodore, sailed into Tokyo Bay in 1853 and forced Japan to open up? Yeah, Perry. And Japan quickly modernized. What was the name of there were two of these wars that Britain, but other Western powers joined in, defeated China, and forced them to open up for trade. Say it again. Before the Boxer Rebellion, there were two wars. You get that? Yeah, the Opium Wars. Got a few people finding Opium Wars. What was the rebellion again? The rebellion against foreign economic imperialism and missionary activity. The Boxer Rebellion, what was it called? To allow all great powers to equally exploit China. Yeah, open door. I'll say this, China, like I said before, has not forgotten any of this. So, let's finish up the war. One thing about this was so surprising. I mentioned the Treaty of Portsmouth, but I want to get to this cartoon. First one, this is the idea now with Russia defeated, maybe Asia will avoid colonization. Asia for the Asiatics, I know that sounds very awkward, but it's showing China, the Qing dynasty, they had to wear their hair in a queue like that, and all men did, and Japan. Now, of course, Japan was a brutal colonial master to Korea and Formosa and places in China they would take, but implying that. The new world. Here's another one. Little Japan defeating Russia. France in Russia's corner, Britain in Japan's corner. So we got to the Treaty of Portsmouth. Teddy Roosevelt would win one of the first Nobel Peace Prize, for negotiating this treaty. And so he could be the great peacemaker. So yes, he would do basic diplomacy and deploy the Marines, etc., but at the same time could bring them together. By the way, the Grand Duke was 6'7". Russia, he was there, Grand Duke Alexander. And his nephew, the Tsar Nicholas II, was about 5'7". And so he was about a foot taller than his nephew. Just one of those weird little quirks of history. Japan felt cheated. They felt cheated by this treaty. They felt that they should have got more of China, more colonial possessions. They'd also feel cheated after World War I. I think you might see a resentment growing. But soon after this, it became clear that Japan was a growing threat. And Kaiser William II of Germany would dub them the Yellow Peril. And that was all about this obsession with skin color. And no, I do not know the origin of why people from East Asia are going to be falling. Eastern part of Asia. Yellow. I don't understand. But I'll tell you, I do know why American Indians, why the term red. That was a mistranslation of a French document. It mistranslated, also became red. But Yellow Peril with the Japanese moving here, America moving. These are German colonies, French, Dutch, British, etc. And a couple cartoons implying, first off, the fear of China, and then look how they draw the Yellow Peril. That's a German cartoon. In 1907, the United States would send its relatively new fleet called the Great White Fleet around the world. And so the U.S. was showing off their naval power. It was a way of saying, we, the U.S., we're on the world stage. And to threaten Japan. They would stop in Japan and they would stay in Japan, this Great White Fleet, on a peace mission. Show the Japanese, okay, you might think you're strong, but look at our modern fleet. And so one of the new ships that was made after the 1890s, steel, coal turbine engines. And you see one of the problems with coal, well, besides the weight, how little they can carry, hard to sneak up on anybody with coal engines, isn't it? And oh no, that's it. They painted it white because that was going to be peaceful. It took a year and a half to go all the way around the world. This long voyage, 42,000 miles. And when it arrived back in 1909, so 1907 to 1909, over a year and a half, every one of those ships were obsolete. The British had invented a new naval vessel, we now call it the Red One, and everything be obsolete. And that would trigger a new arms race, and you start seeing the stepping stones to World War I. So the Great White Fleet, even though it doesn't have timeline, we have a little bit of inconsistency, but that would end this time of imperialism, and the United States became a world power. In fact, this cartoon would be part of an article that would say America as a world power. So before 1898, the United States was strong, an incredibly fast-growing economy, arguably the biggest in the world. By the end of imperialism, before World War I, the United States had the biggest economy. Tiny army, but a big navy. And now the United States was a great power, indisputably a great power, and dominating the Western Hemisphere. And here's showing kind of the Roosevelt corollary. Teddy Roosevelt's now the policeman, the new diplomacy, big stick. And everybody, Latin America, Asia, European powers, coming to the United States. And the important thing is looking at this for the rest of history. It's not just what it's going to do in Latin America, but we're right on the eve of World War I. Where Europe is still dominant, but the US is becoming an economic giant, and then Europe will destroy itself. That means the relative strength of the United States will grow dramatically after this. And we are still kind of living on that today. But that's the end of imperialism. Yeah, I just this Robert Corley our end of this. That was really scary, so I enjoyed that one. Who as a little kid used to be worried that there'd be something under the bed would grab them when they put their feet down. Did anyone think that? Be honest, did anyone? Does anyone still kind of worry about that? All right, so let's get to the progressives. The progressives are related to the populists, and we'll get to more of what they stood for, but Teddy Roosevelt, we're going to have two progressive presidents. And Roosevelt, Republican, Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat. And here's Roosevelt taming the trust, the monopolies. And I know I like the beef trust, but they're going Standard Oil, Coal Trust, Coal Trust, and beast. I don't know why that's a bird. I don't understand that part. But who are the progressives? These are middle class reformers. They're middle class. These are people that are benefiting from society. They're not the vast majority of people are working class. They're not men. Working class people, still it's the biggest class today. They require most of the money they make for survival. Food, shelter, they can save very little, etc. Upper class people do not necessarily have to work, enjoy the trappings of an upper class life. At that time, it would have been home, summer home, the big home was having servant, etc. Middle class can afford some of the trappings of an upper class life, but they have to work. So they're benefiting from capitalism. So they have professions that give them jobs where they can afford things like their own home without going into a great amount of debt. That's a big part of it. At that time, a servant, providing a better life for their children. A big thing is upper class, middle class can save a little bit of money. Upper class save a lot of money. Most working class people, it's incredibly difficult because almost everything goes to survive. And so today would be things like being able to afford to send your kids to college without a great amount of debt. Things like that. And we can go on and on. Middle class. And so they're not the populists. Populists are people on work, small farmers, laborers, bottom up. These are people, we're benefiting. We don't want this to end. So here's Roosevelt, another one as a lion tamer. Yes, lion tamers used to wear kind of uncomfortable leotards and circuses, but taming the truss, steel truss, etc., kind of like that one. And their basic idea, much like the populists, we better reform or go out revolution. And they were terrified of anarchist socialist revolution or of dictatorships. And they associated dictatorships with monopolies. The term fascism was not get around. We won't get that to the 1920s. So reform or else. Reform or else. And remember, the president of the United States was killed by a revolutionary, an anarchist, just in 1901. And this is in both parties. But there's all kinds of inconsistencies amongst them, but there are Republican progressives and Democratic progressives. And they are, in many ways, allied, but not populist. They're allied. And this is a Swiss cartoon, which I find awesome, of the American Hercules and their fear of anarchism. And so here's Roosevelt naming anarchism. By making reforms, you avoid the revolution. And there's a way they're going to do it, so we'll get to that in just 1 second. So, what are these characteristics? And number one, society can improve. When I mean can improve, we can improve it. We can make a better world. It's not laissez-faire. Hands off and just hope for the best. Hope the market will decide. We can make a better world. And here's Roosevelt as kind of like the chef, putting conservative, radical, socialist, progressive, democratic views all together to make a better world. And so, for example, we can make this better world by most progressives, like the populists, believe in women's rights. The big you were voting. Here, sheet music was the rage. So here's the song. I did not look at the song, but my guess is it's probably not very good. But sheet music was big. Records were still beyond the reach of most people, but people used to play it. And I love the progress, women's right to vote, steamrolling the opposition. But progressives were for women voting. At least said they. May all progressives said this. Now, some genuinely believed in equal rights. Some believed if women were allowed to vote, they vote progressive. So, I should add, people today sometimes call themselves progressives. There are definite connections, but like all we get in history, it's not a direct line. So, another example of society can improve was we'll literally force morality on society by prohibition. Prohibition means get rid of what? Yeah, ban alcohol. We can remake society without all the problems of drunkenness and the money that would spend and the abuses that would happen with this. But also the personal freedom, and it doesn't have to necessarily be that way. And this really fits in. Women led this fight for prohibition in the name of humanity, a little bit of domesticity in there. But this idea that, yeah, this would be the grand experiment to remake society. And using wartime measures, that would lead to prohibition after World War I. And even though drinking went down dramatically, it also showed the limitations of trying to enforce a version of morality on people. But that's what they thought they could. Another example, which also shows how divided they are, would be civil rights. There were a number of progressives who believed in civil rights, and they would be like many of the populists. For example, a group we mentioned before, the NAACP, that would demand the end of Jim Crow laws and voting rights for African Americans. But there were a significant number of progressives who would have said, I'm for equal rights, but we just have to simply accept the science about this. There are different races with different abilities. We have to accept that. So we should not condemn somebody for being low on the totem pole. But they can't have all the rights and abilities of someone on top. Meaning, there was a lot of social Darwinism. A lot. You're going to get progressives that were for equal rights for all, and also get people who call themselves progressives that were for eugenics. You remember eugenics? That was basically breeding of human beings, and so they did not allow race mixing. Another example would be social justice, also called social welfare, social welfare. and people misuse this term all the time today. This is in purely the economic sense. And they look at it as we have a morality issue. You can't do whatever you want with your property to get rich. You can't do whatever you want. There can be controls. Property over profit. Teddy Roosevelt would talk social justice all the time. So you can't just get rich however you want. So that means the biggest example would be you can't gouge essential services. And the big ones that the progressive use, much like the populace, railroad, telephone, electricity. And we could go on to other essential services today, but to be honest with you, they're not a heck of a lot different now. Transportation, electricity, communication, essential for survival in the modern world, especially electricity. So you can't just jack up the price. And that also includes your clean water. We can go on. So they're saying the big thing is monopolies can't do whatever they want. And so they would talk about the general welfare of all, which is in the US Constitution in the preamble. I'll not clear what that means. But if we have 40% of the population in the United States, 10, that were impoverished, the country is weak. We must promote everybody. And why? They would argue because of monopolies and control. And how do you solve this? This is their goal. We need more middle class, a bigger middle class, more people with money to afford some of the traffic. The most important thing is more people who do not have to send their kids to work at factories. More people who are not condemned to live like this in basement tenements in New York City. If more people feel part of the society, they'll be less likely to revolt because the society is working for them. If people feel society isn't working for them, that's where you get. They thought anarchism or dictatorship. In the modern world, you would say not dictatorship, but fascism. And that would be the basis of liberal economics. That is why by the 1950s, after 20 years of liberal economics, people in the United States all started to call themselves middle class. We're all middle class. The middle class was growing pretty fast until the 1980s, and then it's been shrinking ever since. More working class. So, democracy. Let the voters decide. Now, the thought was, if they had a choice, they'd vote progressive. They would vote progressive. And therefore, no corruption in voting. And I forgot to type something in. I meant to type it in after the last period. I forgot to type it in. Great minds. While I'm doing this, you want to see a really cool picture? 1959, the 3 US heavy bombers. Look at that one in the corner. Isn't that just an amazing plane? It's called the B-36. It had 8 engines. Biggest production plane ever made by wingspan in North America. Ever. To this day. I just found them. Maybe that's why I like those. We still use that plane today. Called the B-53. We'll still be using it when I'm gone, probably. So here we go. Democracy. Therefore, they're anti-political machines. And write this down too, anti-political parties. The thought was, if we didn't have the machines and the parties dictating how people voted, people would be more likely to vote for the best candidate, for the best issues. Now that's implying that people get solid information about who to vote for. Which doesn't really happen. But that's what they hope. We can knock out the machines. Yeah. Anti-political parties. And the thought was they would vote for the best. They would vote for those who would do what's best for them. The problem is, political parties give people an identity. Now we have incredibly weak political parties in the United States. The parties are so weak that it's a problem. And we know the parties are weak because more people identify as independents, members of different parties. And so even though we do have Republicans and Democrats, and they seem divided and they seem strong, they're actually shocking. Yeah. Well, a republic is a government by representation. And a democracy implies that the people are sovereign. And so in a republic, if you allow the people to choose their elected officials, that's considered a democratic republic or more of a democracy.
I just why is the United States
Because the United States has government by representation.
not something government?
No, it's in the Constitution, so you'd have to change the Constitution. So the United States is a republic. Now, a republic, if you just allow like a tiny little group to pick your leaders, an oligarchy, it's a republic. It's government by representation. The United States is more of a democratic republic, so therefore more of a democracy, because we allow voters, the people, to choose for them. And so we'll get to this at the end of progressives. But the thought was a democratic republic would be the best way to ensure this. But yes, we are. But it is believed now in the United States after Andrew Jackson that we are a democracy, meaning ultimately the people make the decisions. So we don't want the government anymore like the Constitution. Ultimately, the people can change. So we believe that. But a republic is a technical term for the form of it. So number 4. I know you get some people say we're not a democracy, we're a republic, and I just want to tell those people that you don't know what we're talking about. So experts. Experts are like these trained professionals. And the thought was, if we allow people to vote, they'll vote for the ones that are best capable to run the system, not political hacks, not people trying to get rich. So they want to take a scientific approach and think about the wave of scientific change. They're going to ride that wave and say, now we know we can scientifically prove the way that societies can function. This should remind you of the Enlightenment. This is what many of the founding fathers felt, that we could come up with a system. We're guaranteeing rights, and then the Constitution that was of this Republic Constitution. And so you might hear the term technocrats. You crack for elected, small d, democratically elected, but they are knowledgeable. They have credentials. They have degrees. And in fact, this coincides a progressive reform. All right, if we're going to have experts, we better have standards. And professional requirements came about. And these are progressive reforms. To give you an idea, what do lawyers have to pass to become a lawyer now? Anyone know? Yeah, the bar exam. That's a professional requirement. And every state has a different bar exam. It's very difficult. Or for that matter, certified public accountants must pass a certain test. Teachers must have certain certification. Doctors must actually have residency, etc. Before, those did not exist. Not only that, there was basically liberal arts degree in college, and that's it. Now think of all the different specialty degrees, majors we have. All of those came out of the progressive reform, so people could specialize in their expertise. So from generic liberal arts and humanities, we have all the different literature in English, or for example, think of all the social studies ones. Now we have history, study of government, which is called what? College. No? What degree if you study how governments function? Political science. And you notice they use the word science. Economics became a degree. And then in actual science, revolution. Think of all the different majors you can get in different types of biology or chemistry, etc. Why? These are progressive level reforms to get experts. Now, there's a hitch. What's the hitch? It's a little social element. That we must give up our personal freedoms to an expert. And what makes them an expert? Well, okay, they got a degree. What kind of people can afford to go to college? I think you can see some issues though. Are we going to give up our democratic rights so we have a hierarchy now of knowledge? Not so much knowledge of credentials. I went to this school, this school, this school, this school. I mean, as I've told you before, I know people who are absolute adults, morons, and they have PhDs. I had a couple more of my professors. I still think of one was an idiot. The one I think I told you about his final was to fill up in his little book. You ever heard of a blue book? Little things you fill out. It's about 20 pages. And you had to fill out 2 of them to get the book. That was his final. What are you talking about? So what did everyone do? They just wrote words. Okay. Use them all. And also some of the smartest people I know don't have college, don't have high school diplomas. Really intelligent people. But for whatever reason didn't get it. Credentials can be very much overrated. So, hey, we all have friends who probably don't. Every one of us have friends who don't do all that well in school, and you know they're smart. They're smart. So, 5, anti-monopoly. Antitrust. So, of the oil, railroad, of coal and oil, railroad, and electric, and steel. 4,200 companies in this turned into 250 after the wave of consolidations when they invented holding company. Just a few companies control all. And as we've mentioned many times with monopolies, monopolies restrict competition, quality of goods. What happens to wages if you have monopolies? And if you want to create a bigger middle class, you want higher wages. Monopolies lead to lower wages and therefore a bigger working class of people now more desperate, more likely to revolt. Here is Teddy Roosevelt. And now he's dressed more medieval, facing the giants, which are the monopolists, like that's J.P. Morgan and that's Rockefeller. So it could be David. So a biblical story from the Torah or the Old Testament, but he's also wearing medieval clothing, so it might be like Robin Hood. I don't know what's going on there, but I think you get the point. And then lastly, so how do we do this? What they believe is in regulation. And don't forget, regulation has a problem. Remember the ICC filled with railroad. But only government has this power. Government makes the rules, AKA the laws. By the way, that's why people give so much money to politicians and organized business interests. And I just found this picture that made me laugh. And I thought, oh, this must be part of a bigger cartoon. No, it's just organized big business and its hats coming up. So I don't know what's going on there, but I enjoy it immensely. They make the laws. Nobody else has the power. And don't forget, a monopolist isn't going to get rid of their monopoly voluntarily. Oh, sure. They might make a bunch of really stupid decisions. You know anything about American car companies in the 1970s? You'll see that happen. Or companies, if they're in competition, don't they want something like a monopoly so they don't have risk? So you have to understand in capitalism, there's always striving for monopoly. You just got to accept that. Therefore, what do you do about it? Do you allow it or not allow it? They say, well, control it by regulation. So they're going to create a universal floor, some kind of minimum that no one could go under or over for that matter. Like monopolies, if you have, let's say, over 40% market share, monopolies were going to break you up. And that would be the law basically until 1980. 40% market share, boom, they're broken up. That's not happening at all today. Or for that matter, like a limit on like worker safety. You got to provide this much safety. Or a minimum requirement on food safety. Or by the 1960s, we start with environmental laws. And so things like that everybody must follow. Like wages and quality, and the biggie, of course, is antitrust, the Sherman antitrust. And oh, there we go, found it. So let's get to different views of regulation. Why was this so debated? And let's very quickly review cutthroat competition. So capital competition, we talked a lot about this. It's such an important issue because it directly affects us today. So remember, we have all these businesses in competition. They all want something like a monopoly. Hey, let's review. Do you remember the term from when you have a few companies, 2, 3, or 4 companies that control a market so it operates like a monopoly? You remember that term? Yeah, oligopoly, oligopoly. So oligarchy means ruled by a few, oligopoly, a market run by a few. Everybody wants that. If you have a business, you want money without risk. We understand that. So what are they all doing? They're all dramatically cutting costs. They're all cutting costs so they can undercut their competitors. And when they get a monopoly and continue to cut costs, it becomes pure profit. The Walmart or Amazon effect. And Netflix is becoming this too. And you also notice that places like Netflix have been raising their prices consistently. They're operating like a monopoly because they can do it. So, and they put out garbage. So product safety, or if you're cutting costs, what's the incentive to have safe products? As in products that won't blow up, damage, break right away, or for that matter, food that will kill you if you eat it. What is the incentive? Is it to have safe products? There's a disincentive to make safe products because they have a competitive disadvantage. If they make safe products, if their costs go up, if their costs go up, their market share goes down, and they might be driven out of business. If you cut corners, you're rolling the die, but if you cut corners, you can save money. Here's another one. What about working conditions? Unsafe working conditions. Well, we have hundreds of railroad workers dying every year, thousands of miners dying every year at this time. Should have there's very few railroad workers, virtually no miners anymore. It's all out of it. That's a different story now. But worker safety is a cost. There's a disincentive to have safe working environments. Now, are the owners psychopaths? Are they sociopaths to put out unsafe products, or for that matter, allow the workers to be put in situations where they could be mutilated or killed? Okay. But there's this incentive. It always reminds me of bad movie lines whenever there's a specialty gangster, someone operating to shoot somebody or do something no sense for its only business. There's an incentive to do this. So, if that's regulation, what are the different views? Laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is let the market decide. We don't need regulation. If you put regulation, that will handcuff us. Let us put out good products or bad products. You put out bad products, no one will buy them. You put out good products, people will buy your stuff. And there's a term for this. Everyone in here knows Latin pretty well. And so what does that term mean? Does anyone know Latin? Hey, Latin is made up. But no one speaks Latin anymore, so a lot of it is gotten made up. Okay, I'm not pronouncing it exactly the correct way, but I'm pronouncing it the way I learned it when I first did. It's called caveat emptor. And it means, very simply, just put down fire. So laissez-faire, the person buying the product, the consumer, it's their responsibility to buy good products. But the idea of laissez-faire is if everybody's acting in their own self-interest, we're always going to do what's best for us. Sure, we might make mistakes down the road sometime. That's gonna happen. But if everybody's acting in their own self-interest, that will assure a product safety. Because nobody will buy bad products because caveat emptor. After a couple of mistakes, we'll know better and always buy good. Working conditions, caveat emptor. If working conditions are bad or unsafe, you won't work them. Buyer beware. And it does work. My wife and I were literally just talking last night about we're going to meet some friends for dinner. Good story, huh? But there's a restaurant we used to really like in town. I'm going to tell you any names. a restaurant we used to really like, and the last 2 times we went there, the service wasn't very good and the food was actually. We're like, we're not going. You know, it's fine, it sounds good. And that's caveat emptor. That's how laissez-faire works. You get bad service and bad quality and the cheese will go. So it does work. The market functions. But there is an issue. All want to get a second grade, they all want to guess what restaurant. Yes, it's many more about the. Yeah. You're gonna guess? I won't tell you, which actually makes me very sad. I hope it gets better, but I'm scared to go back. For caveat emptor to succeed, it means what? For you to actually be a consumer who can pick between your different choices, between these different products, what do you need? Options is one. We'll get to that in 1 second. Anyone know? In fact, let's put that right down. Everyone put down monopoly. If there's monopoly, you don't get a chance. You need choice, and the monopolies you won't get a chance. Very good. It should not be ordered. Very good. Yeah, you need competition. If you have a monopoly, you have a choice. If it's garbage, what are you going to do? You go where you go. You get what they get. And so you need choice. You need options. And one more thing, especially people like products that you have no idea what's in them. Think about something. You buy a product, you're not getting a good product. Say it again. Sure. So people test them. With A. I'm sure companies would never make up fake fills as products. Maybe. But you need to know stuff, don't you? You need to know what's in here. Think about food. You know what's in it? You know what really makes your car work? Especially now with more modern cars. You know. And yeah, there might be people testing it, but you need transparency. You need people you can trust where you need to know what's in it. And do you know what's in things? Okay, last period, second period is obviously to be time when everybody wants to have a snack and a sponsor. You know, some of them will think of those of goldfish. And I say, okay, what's in the ingredients of goldfish? And she thought I was invited for bringing stuff. I said, oh, you know, stuff. Can you tell me if this is a good product or bad product by looking at the ingredients? Have you ever looked at the ingredients of something? Can you tell if it's good or bad? Maybe if it says poison. But like I said, first grade, enriched wheat flour. What's that? Huh? Yeah, it's flour, but what's enriched? Highly processed. I have no idea what's in it. If you're not transparent. And sure, you might be able to look at reviews, but it's really difficult. I've looked at reviews. It was a big deal. There was a bunch of places that were reviewing and they were bought off from. So I'm back. Thank you. So, transparency of monopolies. There is an issue with that. So we got that part. Let's move on. Oh, by the way, we're talking about making the rules. I put this up here because this actually blew me away. A group called Foundation for Tax Fairness. So I trust these numbers. This is the contribution, billionaire contributions as total percent of contributions for politics, for elections. And it's shocking what has happened. Citizens United in 2011 basically said unlimited contributions. And look how much, about 0.05% of the population now contributes to politics. Why? Make the rules. So who's dominating our politics? Just a few people. I mean, one person can put $1 million into a campaign in Montana and win the election because Montana is so small. And so that's why they do it, because of these rules. And most of them are laissez-faire. They do not want to be messed with in competition. So here's what the progressives believe. We got a regular. And what we want is an even playing field. No matter how big you are, you all must meet these minimum standards for everything from worker safety to food safety to safety of products. And there has to be a regulatory body that does it, or for railroad rates, monopolies, we can go on and on. And that will lead to more competition. That will lead to more competition. More competition, better quality, and what does competition do to wages? Raises. Want a bigger middle class, you don't want monopolies. And then that will lead to all this: wages, quality, cost. And if everyone has this minimum, by the way, do companies want this? If everybody has to follow, they don't mind. Because then we know we all have this minimum flow. And also, if there's minimum standards, that alone, I'm meeting this standard, will convince people you can buy their product as a more cheap. If you get rid of the floor, then it becomes a free for all. And so companies actually kind of want these, they just don't want them too high, the minimum standard. They want them pretty low standards. This is actually a big issue now in cars. Because there was a movement to make lower emission in cars, to push more for either higher gas mileage or more electric cars. And so car companies made all these switches to go to these lower emission, higher gas mileage cars. And the Trump administration has thrown all of those out. And now car companies don't know what to do. And they literally don't know what to do. Because what happens if we get something totally opposite 3 years later and go switch back? And so what are they doing? They're just not producing. Production is actually dropping for American car companies. Why? Because of that. That's why if you don't know, it could lead to a free for all. But here's their point. Or else, we don't have this, you will get dictatorship or people having enough, and they will overthrow the system. And that, Chicago. And I love Chicago, the meat packer to the world, just simply divided up into various different states, etc. So let me get one more thing. So the muckrakers were reporters who began to report on some of the so-called corruption, monopoly control, etc. These were reporters. And this would be a new breed of reporters. And they become really big in the 1970s. And now we just have so few reporters that it's very interesting. Just don't really exist as much anymore. Ida Tarbell would be the most famous. She would write a series of exposés on Rockefeller and all the abuses of the Standard Oil monopoly, and help lead to it being broken up under the Sherman Antitrust Act and give President Roosevelt the reputation of a trust buster. Jacob Reeds would write, he's a photojournalist, and would take pictures of the miserable conditions of the working poor in New York City, how the other half lives. And this would help lead to reforming of building codes, etc. In fact, ironically, would also help lead to Teddy Roosevelt's political rise as a reformer of tenements in New York City. And then Upton Sinclair. Upton Sinclair was no muckraker, and he was no progressive. But his book, The Jungle, and other books, he wrote this great book called Oil, about the abuses of the oil industry, were led to reforms. Upton Sinclair wanted to reform the economic system. He was a socialist, and he wanted to prove this is how bad the system is by showing how bad workers are being treated. And yet people read it and. As he would say later, I aim for their heart. And I hit their stomach. Tomorrow, make sure you have the reading the jungle. I'm going to give you a credit for it, but we're going to talk about that and food. Sound good? It better sound good. And then we'll get the city government, and then we should probably have a test. We'll do a test today. Yeah, sit down. We're taking a test. We're not leaving. I make the rule. Okay, let's. Who thinks it's going to be 8 degrees? Raise your hand. It's gone up 1 to 2 to 4. If it's 8, I'm actually kind of scared.
The cartoon is now, it's a moose, it's.
I swear to you, I am not making this up. 8 degrees. Oh no.
It's a 6.
Oh no. Oh no. Okay,
And 30.
that's pretty funny.
60.
Yeah, just do the questions and.
Hey, it's going, it's going. Two.
You.
I want this in the question.
Come on. And I'm just gonna go through and really check because, hey, the big thing about the John goes, when I say underline, I just make sure you read it, thought about it. I'll give you a little credit. Just make sure you have it tomorrow. Hey, and I'll show you big nuggets.
Yeah, okay.
I gotta admit, I've not had a chicken nugget.
By the way, it's double.
How about it? Thanks, big deal.
Yeah, like we do browse fiction eggs. Yeah.
But you don't, not necessarily.
Like I just.
Yeah.
It's just.
Yeah, no, I do.
They are delicious.
Yeah, see, I'm good, a good question. Very good question.
I'm not feeling good, so it's gonna.
I'm sorry, you don't feel good. What, you have a quiz, right?
It's a test.
Oh, that test, yeah. You have a sheet of paper? Do 1 to 20, you have to go out in the hallway. 1 to 20, I'm sorry, you feel bad. 1 to 20 in the margin, remember, we use this beautiful piece of paper. Right there in the margin, and then
And then, yeah.
it should say, yeah, one of, I forgot of. And then, can you still read these okay? These, those things has to be on the bicycle.
Okay.
Alcohol? You can use my paper if you want or not.
Okay.
This college rule is good. It's nice. Oh, it's flowers.
Yeah.
You ever think with your eyes see something and I couldn't get out? So I thought, why do you have little people marching on there?
It's great.
Since first grade?
Yeah.
That's a good backpack.
Yeah.
Well played. Two people got it.
I almost saved it though.
Right, somebody just had spatula hands, knock it all.
I was not prepared.
Oh, interception, that's got it around.
Around the corner, I was not prepared. So what is this presentation? I'll send you about it. I figured out exactly how to turn. Don't be fair. I got it. I kill you. That's just those down. Going home. They need that. Well, no, sure, I'm sure.
Jack.
Did you carry it? Tom, why don't you bring 4 carrots? I'm not gonna carry it like this. Maybe it's a thing. Whatever you think. What? Whatever you think about the one. He's not happy. I've got this. I think I should blame it all on me. I've done most of our news. I mean, well, good life. Luke went. I mean, I didn't. Luke went where? It was, you forgot. I just. I can't even imagine what I'm.
It might be.
Wait, where's the piece meeting on the candidates? Like there. Maybe we have something.
Yeah.
I read one. Over here. Our little English paper.
So I was going with that, and then this one, yeah.
That's
That's
something I would sacrifice.
I don't want to sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun.
We gotta keep going.
Wednesdays.
Oh, we can get rid of that.
I didn't take rolls.
They're getting rid of the Joseph Stalin.
No, we can look at that. That's funny. Maybe you'll see I changed the finance.
Once a year. And I study that. So